Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mental Health Impact Series, Season 2 and Episode 10. I can't believe we're in Episode 10 already. Today, we have a very special guest with us on our show. Her name is Cassandra Hope. She is tuning in from Costa Rica, and she is a functional trauma therapist. I am so excited for this discussion today. We will be talking everything related to trauma. If you're tuned in and you have any questions, please let us know in the comments section and we will make sure that we address your questions. Hello, Cassandra. How are you today? Could you introduce yourself with the audience?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited and humbled to be talking about such an important topic today. I'm here here in Dominical in Costa Rica, originally from Toronto, which is where I did all of my trauma-informed functional training. I'm here. I've expanded my practice since everything is online these days. And I'm seeing people from all over North America and now in Central America as well.
That's beautiful, Cassandra. Thank you. Could you tell the audience a little bit more background information about your professional journey that has sort of brought you here today?
Yeah. So I am a victim of childhood abuse, complex PTSD. And as I was growing up in my 20s, I started doing as a lot of victims of childhood abuse do, start to put my value in my body. And I started bodybuilding and doing fitness competitions when I was pretty young, about 21, 22. And started fitness modeling and doing quite well in that world. But I realized my gut got really, really messed up, my digestive system, and my body. I was getting chronically injured and having a lot of issues with hormones. And it really brought me to my knees. And originally, all of my training in school, so as an RHN, I'm a certified RHN, which means I'm a registered holistic nutritionist. And when I went to school for that, it was really to learn how to heal my own body. And it wasn't enough. I actually didn't heal my body after acquiring that certification, and I started getting into the brain. So I became a neurolinguistic practitioner and did my training as an NLP coach to further understand the gut-brain connection. And I was still struggling. So after that, I partnered with a naturopathic doctor who's brilliant in Toronto, Dr. Robin Murphy. And we opened up an online academy called the IBS Academy. And it was all geared toward helping people to identify and clear infections in the gut that were leading to chronic IBS and depression. And I realized that people were relapsing. So once I did a bit more investigation, I started to learn about what happens to the nervous system after somebody's been traumatized, not only once, but several traumatizations throughout their life. And I learned about autonomic nervous system dysregulation. So how the brain and nervous system rewires itself once we have experienced things like chronic neglect or abuse or gaslighting or physical abuse, romantic, intimate abuse. And it really does create the perfect storm for somebody to experience chronic GI issues, very vulnerable to chronic infections, and it triggers a lot of genetic predispositions for chronic inflammatory issues like autoimmune diseases or susceptibility to Lyme disease or mold toxicity. So what I do as a practitioner is I help people to understand these are the events that happened in your life that contributed to your nervous system being sick and vulnerable. And this is how we're going to approach it. So I use a very research-based, very strategic approach to rewiring the brain, clearing infections in the body, and really minimizing the negative impact on people throughout the process, because it can be quite an intense process.
Damn, Cassandra, you've had a journey that has brought you there.
Yeah.
What made you make that switch? I mean, I get why you made that switch early in your career, but if you don't mind me asking, just for the audience to know that no matter where you are, you can choose to change your path at this point. So could you touch base upon that back then that made you change your career completely? Like what brought you to do that and what encouraged you to pursue that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been in my nature since I was a really young child. If I think back to how I showed up in social structures at 5, 6, 7 years old, I care about people. I care about people's well-being. And whatever I knew, I wanted to be able to offer to other people who didn't know, but were wanting the information. So it's in me innately to want to learn and share, learn and share. And ultimately, I had no other choice. I think I was at that fork in the road where it was like, you can continue to go down this path of self-loathing and depression and apathy and fatigue and sensitivity to your environment and not feeling like travel is available to me or romantic relationships are available to me because everything was so stressful. And I was like, but I trust that all of this information out there that people are sharing can possibly help me. So I would try things on. I was open-minded enough and curious enough to say, hey, let's start to research. Like Brahma Kumari was something that I studied for quite some time. And then, yoga of the mind and yoga of the body. And then things like Buddhism and, cognitive behavioral therapy. And ultimately I took what I needed and I let the rest go. And it wasn't until I fully understood the experiential learning of the things that worked for me that I could in turn turn that into coaching cues and a business and relatability and really inspiring people to see what's possible for them. Because before I experienced it and really knew it on a chemical level, I didn't feel confident to teach it. So it's been very much let me put myself through the lab first. Let me integrate the learning and then let me kind of hold space for you in a way where you can see if this feels right to you also.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Cassandra.
Thank you.
Honestly, you are the change that this world needs. So grateful that you're on our show to help spread some knowledge with our viewers. Having said that, let's dive into this discussion. Before we get started, could you share with the audience what is trauma? People that don't know, yes. What is trauma?
Yeah. So, trauma, I think when people first hear trauma, they think of a concussion or a car accident. Somebody's been brutally hurt and there's an ambulance on the way and they're taking them to the hospital. That is definitely a trauma, but there are varying degrees of how trauma impacts the body. And the best description that I've ever heard is trauma is anything that is too much, too fast, too soon. So that could be anything from, one example might be a mother going into a hospital. She's in labor and she thinks she's going to have a vaginal birth. And all of a sudden, within 30 seconds, she's signing a contract saying she's not, putting the hospital liable if anything happens to her and her baby because they have to rush her into a C-section. And that happens so quickly where you can't really advocate for yourself. You can't pause and slow things down and ask questions and make a decision from a sound place. It's too much, too fast, too soon. But you're like, oh my God, I have to save my baby's life. This is important. And in hindsight, that might not have been the decision that the mother would have really, and ultimately they might have made that decision at the end of the day, but really it's like, how much time did my nervous system have to acclimatize to the reality of my experience? And that could be anything from sexual abuse, physical abuse, parents divorcing. There are so many things that lie in that catch-all term. So anything that is too much, too fast, too soon.
Would you say, Cassandra, for someone who has experienced like, let's say as a child, someone has witnessed domestic violence in their house, mm-hmm. would that be categorized as trauma? Because that's not too fast, too soon. It's something that was prolonged. Would that still be categorized as trauma?
Definitely. So another way to look at it is if you feel that you don't have the capacity to defend yourself or to defend your loved ones, right? So if a child, knowing that their physical body isn't strong enough, or they don't have the vocabulary or the autonomy, the agency to protect their family or their mother or their own bodies, that is an immobilization. You're immobilized. You're basically in a like a fawning state or a dorsal vagal state where you're collapsed and you can't get into action. That is also a traumatizing experience, definitely.
Thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it. We have a comment from the audience. Love this discussion already. Thank you for being here, Cassandra.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, trust me, it's our pleasure. I know people that are tuning in, people that will come back and rewatch this. This is going to really make a difference. That's why I'm trying to break it down for people, so they can relate to the message. Yeah. Cassandra, from your experience, what would you say is the impact of stigma when it comes to trauma and people reaching out for help and support?
Yeah. So it's twofold. I think we as human beings, when we've been traumatized, shame is unfortunately, a very natural response, a pathological response to the nervous system rewiring itself after trauma. So shame isn't a personality trait. It is pathology, in my opinion. So when we are in shame and we have societal noise that basically is very much on a subconscious level or an autonomic level, programming us to believe that coming forward and asking for help is a very vulnerable thing. And when we don't feel safe to be vulnerable with other humans, if people aren't safe to us, this is often an autonomic response. We don't know that we think people aren't safe to us. We just innately don't feel it's available to go and ask for help and speak our truth and own our truth and create the boundaries from anybody projecting or challenging us. So it really keeps us from being able to say, hey, I need this help in this way, and these are my boundaries. I am going to allow this type of coaching and information or therapy to penetrate my space, and any projection or any anybody who's disconfirming my truth can stay out there. And that is problematic, especially I find for children, victims of childhood abuse, because we aren't often taught agency. We aren't often taught how to create the vocabulary and boundaries. We learn from our environment. So we're often in a very disempowered place when it comes to accessing help for, do I need medication? Do I need trauma-informed therapy? Do I need somatic therapy? These are all, yes, stigmatized and also incredibly vulnerable things for people to ask for when we don't know how. So what I'm trying to do, or what I am doing with my fundraiser this whole month of May, I do a fundraiser for the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. And what I'm doing is helping to raise awareness of why trauma victims stay stuck in their illness and in their pathologies, because they don't know how to ask for what they need or create boundaries and just own their experience and own their needs.
That's remarkable, Cassandra. I love how you worded that. That makes a lot of sense. It's people that are disconfirming your truth, which is how you're feeling. And we often won't reach out for help if people around us don't seem safe to us. That is so well said. Thank you for sharing that. We have another comment from the audience. Shame isn't a personality trait. It is pathology. So rightly said, Cassandra. I agree. So what would you say, Cassandra, is the impact of trauma on our mental health?
Yeah. So when we look at the brain, the brain triune model, we're looking at the reptilian brain. I really kind of like to split it into two. When we're thinking about the prefrontal cortex, right? So we have our executive function, where we're able to problem solve and access communication and access problem solving and art, creativity. That is the prefrontal cortex. And then we have our reptilian brain, which is more of that fight or flight kind of stress response that has kept us alive for hundreds of thousands of years. It's the oldest branch of the nervous system, and it's very quick to respond to trauma. So what our brain does, which is so amazing, it's a good thing, it's what's kept us here for how many generations, but it reorganizes itself after a traumatic event to make sure that we are hyper aware of the sounds, the language, the tones of voice, the music, the colors, anything that reminds us of the original trauma. It becomes a fire alarm system that's hugely tuned in on an automatic level where we don't have to even think about it. It just knows. This reminds me of something that happened in the past that could be potentially vulnerable for me. And it upregulates your stress response. It upregulates your cortisol response, your adrenaline. It shuts down digestion and detoxification. This is life-saving, right? This is something that helps us to conserve energy so that the energy can be fueled for the fight, right? The body doesn't know the difference between being chased by a bear and being in a room with people who aren't validating us or creating safety for us. It's going to respond in the same way with overwhelm, right? So this constant reorganization of the nervous system, what ends up happening is we occupy more of those primitive parts of the brain, which are not fostering problem solving, accessing education, memory, right? So kids who are growing up in abusive homes and they have trouble in school, and me being one of those kids, oftentimes the parents and the teachers will label them as difficult, not trying hard enough, not paying enough attention, when actually they just can't access the prefrontal cortex because they're not safe. So how are we supporting victims of childhood abuse when we're not validating their experience and identifying the signs and symptoms of trauma in the schoolroom? This is just one example. And rehabilitating them from a trauma-informed place where they have the ability to recognize when they're in a traumatic response or in a trauma state, and gain them or offer them the tools to reorganize their brain on their own so that they can access school, college, have healthy relationships, because this is a skill that trauma victims need to learn. The brain is plastic. We can reroute neural pathways to occupy more of that prefrontal cortex if we're shown how. Yeah. Right? So there's a huge gap, I think.
Amazing. I absolutely loved everything you're sharing. Thank you. Thank you. So for the audience who doesn't know, and again, I want to bring this because I love that you use this word, reptilian brain. Are you referring to the amygdala?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So for the audience that doesn't know much, could you just explain what is prefrontal cortex and what is amygdala and how this helped us back in the day to survive?
Yeah. So the reptilian brain being the oldest branch of the nervous system, specifically the dorsal vagal response. So when we think about the polyvagal theory, which has been studied by Dr. Stephen Porges, the last 20 years of research has really empowered therapists and trauma victims to understand which branch of the nervous system they're activating. So when we look at the polyvagal theory, there's 3 branches that we're assessing. Am I in a dorsal vagal state, which is that collapse, apathy, depression, where you don't want to get up, you don't want to eat, you want to stay in bed all day? That is a life-saving response. Think about if you're walking in nature, you're like, I'm here in Costa Rica, I come across a lot of these huge toads. Mm-hmm. And when they see me, they stop and they play dead. They're in a dorsal vagal response. So they're hoping that we're not going to see them. We're not going to eat them. We're going to think, oh, moving on, right? That's part of our response when we're overwhelmed or we're under threat. That's when we often go under the covers and don't want to show up in the world. That is a trauma response, right? So when we're in a dorsal vagal state or a collapsed state, we're accessing parts of the reptilian brain that are not fostering our more human, evolved, forward thinking parts of the brain. It's a computer system. We're not tapped into that software. Same thing when we're in a mobilized response. That's one of the polyvagal branches, and that is your fight or flight response. So you see, you know, a beautiful bird and you want to go close to the bird and it bam, flies away. They're in a mobilized response. And that is also activating part of that reptilian brain, which is don't even think about it. Like if you're in a car and you're about to get in a car accident, you don't have to think, oh, I need to hit the brake. It just hits the brake. That is how quick that part of the nervous system has evolved over millions of years to respond to environment and threat. So we're often in a trauma response. We're often in some level of activation of that sympathetic or dorsal response. And it depends on the emotional kind of connection to that threat. So when we think about our mother possibly not validating us or protecting us, that has a way stronger emotional tone than maybe a stranger on the street not validating or protecting ourselves. So we have to also think about the parts of the brain that are getting activated when we're under trauma. It's going to depend on how much emotion is tied to that experience as well. Does that help? Is that a good explanation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the synapses. So synapses are new neural connections that are being made in the brain, and they're strengthened by emotion, whether it's negative or positive. So the same way, if you're feeling overwhelmed thinking about this and you're like, oh my God, I've been through so much, how am I ever going to reroute my brain or my nervous system? Remember that the same capacity that your brain has to go into this very kind of trauma looped, inflamed state, we have the capacity to bring it in the opposite direction when we attach joy and play and curiosity and fostering strong, safe connections with people. That rewires the brain because we're having a more intense emotional connection in the opposite direction.
Right. So this brings me to my next question, Cassandra, is what are some ways of healing post-trauma?
Yeah. So number one, play and laughter and joy is the absolute opposite, 180-degree opposite turn of trauma. So if you're watching horror movies and thrillers and you're listening to gangster rap and you're hanging out with people who are like really negative and really disconfirming, chances are you're going to stay in that trauma state longer. It's an uphill battle. So what I do is I like, same way I have hygiene of taking care of my body and my sleep, I have hygiene of my nervous system. So I'm aware of the relationships, the media, this is part of why I moved to Costa Rica. I was like, I cannot hear any more news about oppositional opinions of vaccine versus not. I can't hear it. It's too disruptive for my nervous system. So I need to exit and go somewhere where people aren't even watching the news. We're not talking about it because that is my nervous system hygiene. So when you're looking at rerouting the brain, think about your environment, the conversations, the media you're intaking, but then also consider this is something that's available to you right now. Even if it feels so hard, it's going to feel hard because the brain loves pattern. It loves to conserve energy. So it would rather, even if you consciously know, thinking positively about yourself, thinking positively about your future, etc., is a more health confirming pathway, but it doesn't feel available to you. You're not broken. It's programmed to stay in the same path that it's always been in because it's going to conserve more energy. It takes a lot more energy to groove a new pathway. Think about a fresh falling snow, it's like February 1st, Northern Ontario, a huge dump of snow comes and you want to walk to the store and it's hard, right? You're the first one to walk through that pathway. Yeah. But when you do it day after day, it becomes a fluid pathway. So remember, stopping and interrupting the trauma thought pattern of I'm not enough, nobody loves me, nobody wants to hear what I have to say, I'm not worthy, I'm not beautiful, I'm never going to fix myself. We have to identify the thoughts that lend to those trauma loops and interrupt the pattern. So my one-on-one coaching is to get really strategic on the 7 steps it takes to actually invite the amygdala and the limbic system into a healing state. And that is like mindfulness on steroids, I call it. But if that's not available to you and you don't have access to that script, or it's just not energetically available to you yet, know that just by interrupting the pattern, you're stopping that pathway from being grooved. So I always say, when you identify the trauma loop, just say, stop, 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 my brain is stuck. Stop, 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 my brain is stuck. And that I have to do it sometimes 100 times a day when I'm in a trauma experience. That's okay. Just interrupt the pattern. And that is medicine. It's medicine.
Oh my God. I love that. I love that. Thank you so much, Cassandra. You are such a light. Really appreciate you. We have some more comments coming in from the audience. Thank you for the remarkable work you do with the IBS Academy. Another comment, this discussion is so eye-opening. I second that. I absolutely second that. I have a quick question as a follow-up, Cassandra. Would you say this concept of, you mentioned, I love these words you're using, groove a new neural pathway.
Yes.
Groove into a new neural pathway. Would you say this is what neuroplasticity is?
100%.
100%. Could you elaborate, talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So even in this conversation, we're engaging in neuroplasticity. So people who are watching, when you're reading a book, when you're gaining any, like, neuroplasticity can be cutting your food up with the opposite hands, using different cutlery on different hands, putting your pants on with an opposite leg. What this does is it tells the brain, hey, we're going to reorganize neural connections and start to go in this new area. And that plasticity, that ability to bring the brain in different areas based on conscious directive thought, is neuroplasticity. So, and I'm going to expand that. It's not just conscious directive thought. It's being exposed to information in general is always creating a neuroplasticity effect. So the brain is completely plastic. It will go in any direction that we lead it to go based on the information we're accessing and our environment. So really, it's like you can feel it. You can feel it. Once we start to bring the brain into a more, let's use meditation as an example, right? You go into meditation, and if not always, but sometimes you feel better during and after, right? For some trauma victims, meditation is not available to them. It's way too much of a vulnerable state to sit and be still. They would rather get up and think and do. There's space for you too. You're not broken. You're in a mobilized response. Meditation's going to come in time. But for those of you who meditation's available for or available to, and you're feeling good, that's reorganizing the brain, and you're accessing the parasympathetic nervous system. You're accessing the healing state. So our body innately knows how to heal itself when we're in a parasympathetic response, right? So that branch of the polyvagal theory is the ventral vagal response. When we are accessing, it's our social engagement system, basically. So face-to-face, being with somebody who's smiling, who's validating you. You know, when you're meditating and you're visualizing a really beautiful, gorgeous state, that is inviting the brain to reorganize itself and fall into that ventral vagal state where we can heal. You can take a breath, you can exhale, and it feels good. So you can feel neuroplasticity at work. If you feel like you're getting upregulated and you're contracting and you're starting to rapid fire paranoid thoughts, neuroplasticity is happening, and it's being coaxed into that more inflammatory, upregulated state. So we have to just kind of be able to check in with our physiology and our thought patterns and be like, where am I? Why is my physiology changing? What is challenging me or threatening me right now? And what can I do to protect my brain, protect my body from these upregulating kind of fear-based inputs?
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for shedding light on that. We have another comment here from the audience. I love this discussion. We need more widespread understanding of the science behind our thoughts and reactions. Hopefully that can make a change and a huge difference in tackling stigma.
Yeah.
That's really well said. I think that's Brad watching on the back end. But really appreciate you, Brad. Thank you for that comment, or whoever that was. I'm not sure. Thank you. You really appreciate. We are officially come to an end of a 30-minute discussion today. But Cassandra, this was so incredible. If there's anyone tuned in and they want to reach out to you directly to further the discussion, where can they find you?
I'm super active on Instagram, so you can find me. My handle is Be Well With Hope.
Oh, beautiful.
And I post often. I do lots of interviews and IGTVs, all kinds of stuff.
Beautiful. And you're accepting virtual clients right now?
Yes. My website is bewellwithhope.com.
Okay.
And you can find out more of my programs there. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I didn't mean virtual clients. I meant, are you accepting clients virtually? But I know you got that.
Yes,
Right,
got it.
As we're wrapping up right now, Cassandra, very quickly, do you know what, I don't know if you can see it, do you know what this stands for?
No.
It's basically like two fists put together like this. This is sign language. In sign language, this means together. And we use the color orange in it because orange in color healing therapy, it brings out feelings of warmth and happiness. And our goal, our vision at Reach Out Together is to heal the world together, conversation by conversation, community by community. Just like we did here today, our discussion was so eye-opening, and we know that it will help break cultural stigma within different communities. For whoever is going to watch it, they're going to inform their people, and hopefully that's how we continue to spread this message. Break stigma and encourage outreach for help and support. Because for you tuning in, recovery is very much possible, right? We are in this together. So please reach out to Cassandra. You all know that we run a completely free of cost resource support program. So if you're looking for help, you're looking for support or guidance, you don't know where do you go to get help, reach out to us at resource@reachouttogether.com. We have a team dedicated to doing research depending on where you live, and we can send you links to some people like Cassandra that could potentially help you. And this is completely free of cost. We really just want to help you and encourage you and be there for you. I think sometimes it's about acknowledgement, just acknowledging the pain that people are experiencing, because that really creates space for healing and space for encouragement, when people feel encouraged that, hey, I can do this. I can reach out for help, and recovery is possible.
Yeah. It's not linear, but it's possible.
It's possible. Yes, it is. Love it.
Love it.
Aanchal, recovery is possible. Love it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, team on the back end that's helping us run this program. For you that's still tuned in till the very end, as always, we have a gift for you. I published a book called Success Strategies last year. It became Amazon's bestseller book in 2 different categories. So if you would like my excerpt, a digital copy, completely free of cost, send me an email at aanchal@reachouttogether.com, and we'll make sure you have the excerpt completely free of cost. I hope it encourages you or your family member to pursue help.
That's amazing. Congratulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're
really
lovely.
Appreciate you. This is a wrap for now. Is there any other last few words you have, Cassandra?
I would say the last thing I would say is please don't identify as much as you can. Do not identify with the pathologies of trauma. They are not personality traits, right? Recover, like as you said so eloquently, recovery is possible. It's science. It's not whether you're worthy or not.
I love that. That's a quote right there that we need, team. Thank you, Cassandra.
Yes. You're welcome.
Mwah. Thank you.
Same to you.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, likewise. Thank you for your time. It's a Friday, and I know you're so busy. We really appreciate you getting on the show. If you have a story, or anyone in your community has a story, you're a mental health professional or a person with lived experience, we want to hear from you. Reach out to Ankita from our team at ankita@reachouttogether.com, and we can further the conversation then. For now,
Thank you.
Thank you. For now, let's continue to reach out together for better mental health. Bye for now.
Ciao.